Okay, the president speaking 2 years ago in the wake of 9/11, Congress passed the Patriot Act. Now, some see it as an essential part of the war against terror. Others are calling it an infringement of our rights. Here to debate the Patriot Act are Hussein Ibish of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. Thanks very much for joining us.
Delighted to be with you.
And Paul Rosenzweig of the Heritage Foundation. Paul, we'll get to you in just a second. Thanks for coming in on this Saturday morning.
Thanks for having me.
Hussein, if I can call you that,
sure.
Please tell me what you think the concerns are. Now, you have filed suit against the government. This was designed to detect terrorism and punish those.
Right.
Your concern on the surface, what's wrong with this?
Sure. Well, there's nothing wrong with most of it. I mean, I think, no one is, it's a very huge bill and runs into hundreds of pages with hundreds of different sections. And there's nothing wrong with most of it. Most of it's perfectly fine. There are three basic areas of concern. One is the power for the government to detain foreign nationals indefinitely without charge, just recertifying every 6 months that they're a threat to national security. That's clearly inconsistent with constitutional protections of due process. The second concern, which is the one that we and other groups have brought suit on, that we're co-plaintiffs in a suit challenging, Section 215, which allows the government to collect confidential records on Americans, medical records, educational records, spy on internet activities, get librarians to act as police informants, etc., without judicial review, without a court order, without probable cause, without the proper oversight of balance of power between different branches. And thirdly, is an overbroad definition of what constitutes terrorism that includes things like vandalism and sabotage and things that are really don't constitute what most Americans think of as terrorism and could lead to guilt by association trials and political thought crimes, Paul, which is an area of concern.
Paul, you're sitting there very patiently. Clearly you have concerns about this. Even Dianne Feinstein, a Democratic senator from California, has come out and said, listen, there's just the arguments that people are making are simply too vague. They don't understand it, and there have been no specific complaints.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, I realize this is Halloween time, but it doesn't really do the debate any good to scare people with a boogeyman of government abuse where there's really no evidence of that. As you said last week at the oversight hearings that the Senate is conducting on the use of the Patriot Act, Senator Feinstein reported that she had asked the American Civil Liberties Union to give her a single instance of actual abuse.
And we're talking one
instance.
None. One instance.
Maybe one. But the answer to the potential for abuse is not to deprive ourselves of the power to fight terrorism. It's exactly what Congress is doing now. Oversight, review, insurance that the powers are used rightly. It may be the case that, if we give the government a power, it can abuse it to look into people's books or to use an overbroad definition of domestic terrorism to go after vandalism. But it's simply not the case that they've done that. And the right answer isn't to prohibit that, but to say, let's look over it, let's make sure that we are protecting ourselves. Let's ensure that the FBI and the CIA in their respective spheres are doing the right thing.
Well, gentlemen, hang on.
Say what exactly they've done.
Hang on 1 second, please.
They won't tell us.
That's not true.
Oh, it is true.
They've reported to the Senate Intelligence Committee, the House Intelligence Committee, the House and Senate Judiciary.
No, hang on for 1 second, please, guys. Hang on. Hang on. Calm it down here for 1 second. Let's also talk about the fact that so many states have intervened and said the Patriot Act goes too far. Hussein?
Sure. 200 communities around the country representing 26 million Americans, plus the state legislatures of Alaska, Hawaii, and Vermont have all spoken out in voicing concern. And I think, in other words, there is a growing mood to say, look, this is parts of this are fine, but parts of it may have gone too far. There are two very important pieces of legislation in Congress right now, the SAFE Act and the Murkowski-Wyden Act, both of which are bipartisan, and they are trying to address certain problems with elements of the Patriot Act. And I think it's time that 2 years later we revisit a bill that was rushed through and wasn't properly debated.
That's a good argument, Paul. What do you think about that? I mean, should the government be allowed to listen in on conversations between a client and his attorney?
Well, I mean, those are two different things because, of course, the second of those has absolutely nothing to do with the Patriot Act.
Sure.
The two bills, I'm absolutely for congressional review of how we're implementing the Patriot Act.
We agree
the
with
oversight by Congress of what the government is doing is absolutely vital. But then the legislation should be based not upon evanescent fears, hyperbole, and hysteria, but rather upon what's actually happening. So, for example, when you talk about Section 215, which Mr. Ibrahim's group has challenged, the government has reported that it has used that power to examine libraries exactly 0 times in the 2 years.
Well,
now, that doesn't sound to me like something we should be afraid of.
That comment was very lawyerly worded, and it raises all kinds of other questions. If you don't need these powers, why are they there? And why are they releasing only some very limited information on the use of these powers when it comes to basically...
Okay, gentlemen, I'm sorry. We really have to end on that point. We are out of time, but something tells me you two will cross paths again on this issue.
I sure hope so.
Okay, Paul Rosenzweig with the Heritage Foundation and Hussein Ibish with the American Arab Anti-Discrimination League. Thanks very much for joining us both this morning.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Heidi.